The first churches date from the late 900s. There were stave churches built by carpenters. In time, several stave churches were built in Lund. Lund in 1085. The king's residence. Lund's oldest stave church, back to 900. Tokens, runestone. On the wall is a copy of the runestone from the 1000s. The original was found in the 1700s on the wall of Lund. Lund was a place of rivers, streams, trees, and bushes. Roads meet here, people passed through all directions. The first people in Lund. The first people brought inherited belongings older than Lund. We know about the first people in Lund from the graveyards. People were buried here from the late 900s. Peasant revolt and church reform. Peasant uprising against the king led to civil war in 1525. Some felt the church should be reformed. In 1536, there was a break with the people. A Protestant identity evolved. Trading goods was necessary. Not all things could be manufactured at home. Some materials could be found locally. Gold had to be imported. Glass and casting. Glasses in window openings are unusual. It was mainly for churches. The glasses was imported in smoke and heat from the melting furnace. The casts worked. Metalwork set aside a lot of waste. Pottery and locksmiths. From clay, vessels such as mugs, bowls, dishes, and pots were made. They were used for cooking and serving. Logs were made from iron. They were ingenious constructions for locking horses and crickets. The authority set the law.
Kan vi ha lite folkhemskänsla kvar? Ja. Kan vi ha någonting som vi har från
The authority and the law. Laws were written to create order and security. Ground residents were paid to the crown. Lund had its own special town law. Criminals should be decided in a higher court. clothing and private belongings. Then, as now, clothing style changed. Outfits included brooches and buckles. Personal belongings were stored in bags or hung from the belt. Clothing was made of woven linen or wool. Lund around the 1500s. In 1756, a new vicarage was built in Västra Varm outside Kristianstad, Skåne. It was originally a square-built farmstead around a courtyard. The dwelling house was built by Dean John Bomsmet according to the state directives from 1734, which described that minaret should look like. It was the first of that type in Skåne. The directive states that in the house should have 6 rooms. Both the dean added 2 more. Bedroom for the curate was pointed to the attic. The house is timber frame and was originally painted with red paint from Falun. In 1806, it was plasterized with clay and white washed in keeping with a new style. It served as a vicarage until 1925. It was moved to Kulturen in 1927 as an illustration of the clergyman's home from the early 19th century. The furniture is reconstructed on the basis of an estate inventory from 1815. The deanery. The deanery is a part of medieval brick dwelling that was moved here from Kyrkogatan in Lund. The main part is a tower of defensive character from the 15th century, probably built after the ravage of the Swedish king Karl Knutsen in Lund 1452, when the town was still Danish. The smaller part is much older, dated to the 14th century. Private dwelling houses of brick were built in the Middle Ages by a few prosperous people. In Lund, they were mostly connected to the church. This building was the residence of the dean, the member of the cathedral chapter, immediately below the provost. In the room on the top floor, the treasury of Lund was signed in 1679. In the house on the ground floor is an exhibition about Archbishop Jacob Erlandsen and his remarkable grave. On the first floor, there is a construction of the medieval hall. Kulturen. The Association of Cultural History of Southern Sweden, Kulturen, was founded in midsummer 1882, and some of George's students during the first year of association had several different premises, but the 1890 Kulturen bought the property that today made of the nobleman's house. The Uranus Loft House. The loft house was originally located in the village Uranus, the province of Småland. It was built in the early 1700s using the partially reclaimed pine, wood, and log construction techniques. Then chronological studies show that some of the floorboards are made of timber fared as early as 1300s. The restoration using traditional methods has been carried out on the loft house, replacing decaying timber. The floorboards, for instance, were produced using axes, widgets, and wood hammers to split the logs. In 1892, the loft house was brought to Kulturen, and since then it had been different uses. The lower floor, for example, was previously the site of the Golden Rib Tavern. One of the rooms was now being designated to a scrap room. Rooms like this have been a number of different forms, have been variously called attic, barn, or storage. There is several inner space where all things can be beer part in the collected. A storeroom like this is typically carried. There is several times periods merge. Walls built into several hundred years ago, tools from the 20th century and several hundred years old. Bossebo Church. The church comes from Bossebo in Småland. It was built in 1652 of vertical logs faced with shinglings. The original plan for the museum included the timber church, and when this church was to be demolished in 1894, it was purchased and re-erected to the Kulturen. The gravestones outside the church are from the Middle Ages onwards, and the wrought iron graves was from the 18th century. The ceremony has been here since 1910. The bell tower was built in 1955 to resemble typical examples in Småland. The bell comes from the Vakrea Church outside Lund in the was in Copenhagen, 1621. The church is used for services, weddings, concerts, and other stuff. The summer house. The summer house stands on its original site as part of the 19th century garden. It was built in early 19th century, possibly by a professor who owned the property. The Market Rope Loft House. This loft house comes from a farm, Markestrop, where it's located in the Kronenberg County of Småland. Loft houses were used for storing seed, food, household utensils, tools and clothes. Herbs and flaxes could also be hung up in the dry house. During the summer months, the loft house could be used for overnight stays. On one wall there is a trace of loft house use. On the walls, the words grain, rye and oats have been written on the charcoal, and below the words there were a number of stacks have been counted with lines. The ground in Markestrop was full of stones, and it required enormous work to cultivate the small fields, which were interspread on paddy fields. Inside the loft hang out the wolf patches, linen patches painted with devils, warriors, and other dangerous animals. Until the 19th century, the wolf hunting was carried out in the form of drives to protect domestic animals. The drivers drove the wolf, being the long footprints in the snow and trapping them, and they were killed. The loft house is half timbered and built at the end of 18th century. When it was built, some materials from the older buildings were used, such as the turned plaster drawings of the 17th century. It has been a part of the Open Air Museum since 1892, and it was brought to depict the building tradition of the farmers. The Walker's Home. The house facing street was built 1849 by the journeyman mason. There were 2 flats on the ground floor and 3 rooms upstairs. At almost were 16 people living here and the yard house. The yard is a typical kind of found in Swedish towns with some stone paving, outhouses, and the Pivery. The property was bought by Kulturen 1924. The house on the right contains the construction of the two-room flat occupied by the painter Niels Andersen as its look around 1930s. The furniture and other objects belongs to the family.
Först ser man gjort klart för sig de gränser inom vilka kritiken har rätt, kan man på nytt med framgång hävda den ofrånkomliga sanningen att arbete och sparsamhet är grundvalarna för folkets välstånd. För den enskilde kan det tyckas som om allt vore väl beställt med sparande. När han låter bli att strax konsumera en del av sin inkomst och istället burit pengarna till sin bank. Men från samhällets synpunkt är bara hälften av sig själv och kanske inte det viktiga.
Historic toys. The small historic toy exhibition presents a beautiful collection of dolls, houses, large-scale traditional yellow-side tree, and replica of the rocking horse used by King Charles as a prince. All children, big and small, are welcome to ride the horse. Doll's house with furnitures from 1860s. Charity Freeman, born 1858 in Carson, was first owner of this doll's house. It was then inherited by the daughter and then was donated to Kulturen. Doll's house from 1930s. In 1939, a small Swedish-speaking girl called Nokia, outside Tampere in Finland, was given this dollhouse by her parents. For several years, they had been busy with woodwork, painting, and needlework, so the doll's house would be for her birthday. She was actually given the dollhouse because the time was restless with the threat of war. Since 2001, the dollhouse has become a part of Kulturen. The Unsworth Cottage. Since its construction in the mid-1700s in Johannesburg, central Scania, the Unsworth Cottage has lived a varied life. It has been moved several times and inhabited by many different people before finally settling at Kulturen 1927. The name Enhe Cottage comes from the district of Enhe, where it was originally stood in the parish. The cottage has, as the case with many of the museum's buildings, been lifted out of the context, as its original location would be part of the larger farm set in open, rolling countryside framed by the leafy woodlands. The cottage has assumed a variety of guises since moved to Kulturen. The turf roof, for instance, had been replaced by the brick tiles, since visitors, remember, for a period of time served the playhouse, where clocks had been tried to present woodcocked. Since 2009, the interior has been presented, and it would have looked around the mid-1800s, when the window was a bit different. Their home was simple, but they could be described as poor. The records we have don't show exactly how it looked. The Blacking farmhouse. The farmhouse from Nybygden in Jämjö, Blacking, was built in the mid-18th century. The dwelling house is one of the best preserved examples of the South Jutland house type, which was common in Blacking, northern Scotland. The house itself was several buildings, but only the dwelling house are the stable were brought to the museum. The builders used characteristic techniques for furlocks cut in half to save timber. The Blacking farmhouse has been renovated several times. The first time was in the 1930s, when the central part was dismantled and rebuilt with mostly new timber. In 1995 to 1996, the dwelling house underwent a total renovation. A project was in progress at Kulturen to give the training of building techniques. The house was chronologically dated to the mid-18th century. The stable was dismantled in 1997. The Bosmont Croft. The cottage comes from the craft of both small and date back from the 1850s. It was built entirely of wood with low walls to save expensive timber. It was built for poor people, and the roof is that brick dark too. When it was moved to Kulturen in 1924, it was rebuilt to show how tenement soldiers lives. Today, the cottage looked like what it did when Kulturen bought it. In the house, there's reconstruction of Christiana Nicholson's home around 1900s. The Helsingborg Halmstad house with a Hornsberg room. The house was built around 1930s. The facade towards the playground was inspired by Berger's house in Halmstad. The one facing yard was modeling on the house of Helsingborg. The Warholm house. The house was built in the end of 18th century. The two timber-faced facades, one with a brick and another with pressurized panels. Women's art. The most beautiful, most lavish textiles were made by women for their own home to be used for special occasions. Young, unmarried women move articles in their jewelry. Painting schools. Groups of painter and painting schools can be discerned when many objects has been preserved. One can really recognize dexterity, the choice of colors and motifs. The painter have a presence through their names are usually missing. Women of the forest. Whole families could work in crafts of various kinds. The division of labor between man and woman was more flexible in northern Skåne. Craft works has many stages that women children could perform, such as small decorative painting jobs. There were also women who painted wall hanging and women who did carpentry. Carving for carving. Carpentry was something that all men had able to do, and a good farmhand was expected to make various wooden implements. But artistic decoration, did anyone do that? The painted wall hanging on south of Sweden. Painted wall hangings was found only in part of southern Sweden, where the South Götaland house occurs. Objects from Kulturen's collections. Custom fashion. The exhibition showed folk customs from Scania, which had looked virtually the same for centuries, made from material that was preserved, inherited, and reused. Undergarments, peasant-shaped and shirts were not underwear as a strict sense. They were shown under skirts and jackets. Feast and Christians. Dressing a bride took so much time. It was done in the evening before the wedding. As it today, wedding brought status as an opportunities for the farm to display the wealth. Jewelry was farm's capital, and no provinces surpassed Scania and Lapland when it came to the amount of custom silver. When did not have enough custom silver, they borrowed from the relatives. Wedding. For prosperous peasants, a wedding was an important manifestation. It gave them an opportunity to display their wealth and status. The betrothal meant that the two families had established economic contract. The bridegroom's share was a farm and the promise of being provided for. The bride bought furniture, textiles, and household utensils as her jewelry. The fact that these weddings are actually can be seen from many markings with the initials of man and woman and the year of wedding. Rococo, with a focus on coziness. The small room known as a cabinet represents a dwelling in the mid-18th century. The white coating gives the room a cozy character and serving as a canvas for the painted wall coverings and the decorations. The views of French theaterworks are a good illustration of the powerful influence of the French culture on Sweden in the decades in the middle of 18th century. The 18th century as a cultural year is a spirit, attitude, mentality that begins to shape much earlier. The 17th century was truly revolutionary century. It was not until the mid-18th century that new idea had become consistent part of living cultural movement. The Gustavian cabinet, 1790s. The cabinet was one of the smaller rooms of the house. This was the everyday living room. Here people could sit down after dinner in the heat of the stove. The furniture is actually placed in the traditional way along with the walls. People at this time would find small, light furniture easy moved to suit the needs of activities. In the classical spirit, the window panel in this room once was used in Lund, a timber frame building from 1786. The painted door initials were found in the different house of Lund. Baroque interiors have new type of furniture such as cabinets and uphold chairs. Textiles on the walls, when woven in silk, could cover all surface to display the room in Baroque places. The motifs were borrowed from the biblical tales, from history and classical mythologies. Parlour in Bougney's home in the 1830s. The parlour in Bougney's home was a room where the family could together and also entertain guests. The function is reflected in the furnishing. Tables and chairs are in the center of the floor and in front of the sofa. A group intended of socializing. They were now made of sets. The style and material. The oil lamp on the table enhanced the social atmosphere. It was fashionable to read and enjoy the tea together. The summer house tapestry from the Osby home. The tapestry in this room is painted on oil linen around 1820s by Christian Garment. After his artistic education in Germany, he came to Copenhagen and then moved to Malmö in 1807. Where his father was from Germany, an estate manager. Food court on 1880s. Historic room. The 19th century saw the emergence of a new middle class, a prosperous bourgeoisie of industrialists, manufacturers, finances, senior officials, wholesalers, and other people. The new create a home environment resembling the old, they had formerly surrounded upper class. It was natural for them to pay tribute to the style of the old times.
Alltså då sitter de och, nu har de något där inne, så tittar du i två, ser du vilka två. Så du får med på här ser du, i detta hållet ser man att det är två. Det bygger på att vi har två ögon, höger och vänster öga och överlappar varandra. Det är där du ser ljudet. Om du tittar på ena ögat så ser du inte ljudet. Du måste titta på bägge ögonen för att se det. Och här ser du det, här är det.
The burgher's house. The house is timber frame building from the 16th century and demolished in marble in 1891. Kulturen used the brackets from the house and the architecture. Kulturen used the blocks from the house and it was completed in 1892, was first known as Marble House, but later the burgher's house. It was part of the Kulturen's aim to display form from the four estates of society: nobles, clergy, burghers, and peasants. In the 1890s, there were some interiors to show the burghers' lives, but the majority of the rooms were used as administrative premises for the museum and the residence director of the museum. It was not until 1917 that the exhibitions were shown in the whole house. The building were used for exhibition room of time, showing how people lived from 1500 to 1900. Group homes roommates, 1500. Yes. The ladies' room around the 1500s. This room is modeled on one of the castles in the southeast state Skåne. The castle had two living rooms, the ladies' room and the day room. The ladies' room is where people spend day together, where guests are received. Hot air from the big furnace is coming, and the log fire beneath the absolute center of the home. Books. There are different types of the books, long written book. Textile. The Lindfors House. The house was built around 1755 and still stands on original site. It was built of timber framing, which is visible towards the yard and plastered towards the street. The fencing master of Lund University, Per Henrik Ling, lived here during 1807 to 1870. He is best known today as the father of Swedish gymnastics. The house is called after Professor Anders Otto Lindfors. It's a typical representative of the burghers' home in Lund. The ground floor house is University Museum, which represents the history of Lund University from foundation of 1660s to present. Upstairs are offices of the museum staff. Ida Eklund's atelier was on top floor on the house built by photographer Maria John. It has a spacious arterial with several rooftop windows, which let the daylight in. The timber-framed house on its original site was built in two stages in 1818 and 1832 by Professor Anders Otto Lindfors. The professor's home. In 1814, the house was built by Paradisgatan in Lund for the professor of botany. It was a stately building, one of the biggest private homes in Lund, timber framed with brick-filled panels and plastered all over. The main facade faces a street, and if you pass through the gate, you enter a yard with outhouse further on its garden. The Tomander family lived here 1833 to 1850. The house was then owned by Lund family, and at the end of the 19th century it was turned into the nurses' hospital after the Kulturen University bought in order to demolish to make way for extension for the Department of Physiology. Ida Tomander then bought the children's home and donated to the Kulturen as an illustration of the professor home and a memorial of her beloved and famous father, John Henrik Tomander. The Lund Hall. Klara Eschman is one of Sweden's most famous architects, who worked in Lund from 1940s to 1979. He designed the Lund Hall, which is opened in 1957.
Jag har haft frihet hela tiden när jag jobbat på
The entrance was built with stone from archaeological excavation of Lund's medieval time.